Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and this is Ron's Bank Shot Breakdown. We're going to go over 5 college basketball games for Monday, November 13th, 2023. Now, if you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to put your college basketball picks in the comments section below. And if you're looking for my best bets, including my $19 Bank Shot best bet, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games for Monday in college basketball. First up, we see Siena and American. This one's going to be 7 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on ESPN+. Now, Siena opened the season with a win against Holy Cross at home, 73-71, but failed to cover the number in that game against the spread, and then followed it up with a blowout loss, 90-48 at Richmond, obviously failing to cover the number in that game as well, and in that game struggling to defend their three-point arc, giving up 55.6% to the Spiders from 3, 10 of 18 shooting. That's worrisome going into this spot on the road against an American team that takes a ton of three-point jumpers and made them at a pretty good rate last year, top 150 in the nation in three-point percentage. Now, on the other side, American opened its season with a loss at Villanova. No shame in that, but they also failed to cover the number in that game. It was 90-63 the final score. The next game was at William & Mary. It was about a 1-point line in that one, but they lost by 19 points, 75-56. But I do think that that's a really improved William & Mary team. So both teams in this matchup looking for their first cover of the season. American looking for its first outright win of the year. I think American gets that win. I think they get the cover as well. As the home team, their first home game of the season, like I said, I'm really worried about the Siena three-point defense. It struggled so much against Richmond in that game on the road, and I don't think Siena's defense holds up in a game like this. So give me American. I'll lay the points at home. Next up, we see VMI taking on South Carolina. This one's going to be 7 o'clock Eastern. It's also going to be on ESPN+. It's a part of the Arizona Tip-Off series, but it is a campus game, so it's a home game for South Carolina. Now, VMI, we faded VMI in the first game of the season against Richmond. We were laying about 17 points in that one. Richmond won that game by 18, 93-75, so we barely got the cover. But I got to say, I was actually pretty impressed with VMI's performance, really on both sides of the ball. Even though they gave those 93 points, 34 of them were to one guy, Jordan King. He had an amazing game, one of his best games of his career, obviously. 5 of 6 from two-point range, 50% from 3, and all of his free throws he made. Other than him, VMI actually played pretty well defensively against Richmond, and on the offensive side, they made 42% of their threes, scored 75 points on the road against a solid defense. So I give VMI credit for that game, and I think going forward, we're going to find some value spots, especially in non-conference play with VMI. I think this is one of those spots against a South Carolina team who's 2-0 both straight up and against the number, but I still think is the weakest team on paper in the SEC going into the year. I don't think they have any business laying this giant number against most Division I teams. And while I think South Carolina wins this game, there's no way I can lay this many points against a VMI team, like I said, was a lot better in game 1 than I expected. They followed that game with a nice win against a subdivision opponent. So give me the points here with VMI on the road. Next up, we see Stetson and Houston. This one, 8 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on ESPN+. Now, we took the points with the Stetson Hatters in their last game against UNLV back on Saturday, but they failed to cover the number in that one. 71-55 was the final score. Stetson, one of the best three-point shooting teams from last year in Division I, so I thought that it was a pretty good matchup for him because UNLV was really struggling to defend the perimeter going into that game. They did so against Southern in the outright loss, but UNLV was able to defend really well in that game, holding Stetson to 55 points. And now I think this is an even worse matchup for Stetson on the road against Houston. It's beyond the fact that Houston's been one of the best programs in college hoops the last decade. It's really more so just the matchup itself, the way that Houston plays, I think makes this a nightmare of a matchup for the Stetson Hatters, as Houston's a very, very defensively sound team. They're second already in adjusted defensive efficiency this year. They were 5th last year. They're usually in the top 10, at least top 25 in college basketball under Kelvin Sampson. And they're also a very responsible team on the defensive glass. They're great against the three-point shot. They're good perimeter defense. They force a lot of turnovers. So Stetson, I don't really like backing them when they're playing these physical, defensive, front court heavy teams like Houston. And we haven't seen Stetson play Houston in a while, but we saw him play a similar team, not as talented as Houston, but a similar style of basketball last year in Gainesville against the Florida Gators. And that was an absolute blowout loss for Stetson, 89-51, the final score in that game. Now you're playing a team that was probably 10 times better than that Florida Gators team last year, and your offense for Stetson's not nearly as good as it was last year. It lost a lot of talent in terms of the shooters that Stetson had last season. To me, this is just a nightmare matchup, a bad spot, and a true road game for the Hatters. I'm going to take Houston, lay the big number. I think they win this game by 30+. Next up, we see Florida Gulf Coast taking on Pittsburgh. This one's going to be 7 o'clock Eastern on ACC Network. Pittsburgh lost a decent amount of production from last year's team, but it's really playing well so far this season. I know it's against two, weaker teams in Binghamton and North Carolina A&T, but still 100-52 victory in the first game, 89-60 in the second game against Binghamton. They're playing well on both sides of the ball, strong defensive and offensive numbers, really good rebounding numbers on the offensive and defensive glass, good perimeter shooting numbers, good perimeter defense, and they're fifth best in the nation in two-point defense to start the season. Florida Gulf Coast was competitive in that game against Indiana, another team that lost a lot of production from last year's roster, but it only scored 63 points in that game. It wasn't the most disciplined effort from the Eagles in that one, as they took a lot of fouls in that game, 25 total personal fouls. They only drew 9 of those, so they were, not getting to the free throw line. Indiana had 30 free throw attempts in that game. I just don't think the Eagles' offense is good enough in this ballgame. I also don't trust this perimeter defense a ton. We saw Ave Maria hit 15 threes on him in the last game in a pretty close game, 80-71, the final score. Not really what you want to see in a home game against a subdivision opponent. Give me the Pittsburgh Panthers here, laying the points. Next up, the final game we're to talk about for Monday's card in college basketball. It's South Dakota State and Kansas State. This one, 8 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be on ESPN+. Now, last year, a great season for Kansas State, making it all the way to the Elite Eight. But in the offseason, we saw them lose a couple of superstars, Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson, two of the better players in Division I college hoops last year. So there were some question marks for Jerome Tank's team going into the 23-24 season. And so far, I haven't been too impressed with Kansas State, failing to cover in both of their first two games. One of the games against USC at a neutral site, 82-69, losing by double digits. And then against Bellarmine, 83-75, a win at home, giving up those 75 points to a team in the A-Sun. Not really what you want to see if you're Kansas State, especially in a home game. Now Kansas State plays a South Dakota State team and has a lot of history in the last decade in terms of winning games. And last year was a disappointing season because every year South Dakota State expects to make it to the NCAA tournament. We got to remember this is a team that's only 2 years removed from having a 30-4 record going into the NCAA tournament, winning the Summit League, and then being a 13 seed and playing pretty well against Providence in the first round of the Big Dance. South Dakota State, like I said, last year disappointing. Even though they had a winning record and played well down the stretch, it wasn't good enough for this team. But now this year, they return a lot of talent. They're pretty talented in general on paper. While they lost their first game against Akron, that's a solid Akron team. Really no shame in that loss, even though it was a home game. I think South Dakota State's offense is really solid this season. A lot of shooters on this roster. We usually see South Dakota State have some of the best three-point shooting numbers in college basketball year after year. I do think with Kansas State's defense not really being in the best spot right now, I think this could be honestly an opportunity for South Dakota State to win a really big game on the road against such a solid Big 12 team. I don't think South Dakota State pulls off the upset, but I do think there's value taking them plus the points in this game. So give me the points with the Jackrabbits on the road tonight. And that's it. Those are the games for Monday in college hoops. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to put your college basketball picks in the comment section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.